Did you see the story that Paris wants to have an air conditioning free Olympic Village so that these games can be the greenest games in history? The problem is that a lot of athletes are like, whoa, it's summertime and I love my air conditioning. So it raises the question of, do you have air conditioning? And if you don't, how can you stay cool in your home without it? Well, we are literally going to join the expert who has a lot of background in this world to be chatting staying cool, and that is Caroline Metz, Managing Director of Climate Resilience and Health Intact Center on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo. Welcome to the show, Caroline.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
You have 2 master's degrees and a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. So when you talk about climate and cool, you are the person, Caroline.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I enjoy the topic, and I think it's a really important time in kind of where we're at with climate, so that people really understand that heat is a risk, and it's serious. And we hear a lot about global warming, and the effects of global warming are that it supercharges our weather systems and we get extreme weather, and that includes extreme heat. So these heat events, these heat waves, the heat domes, we're seeing them across the country in places that we didn't have them before, and they're happening more frequently and they're happening more intensely, and people need to prepare.
Well, and when you prepare, so I'll just be truthful and say I love air conditioning. I've always grown up with air conditioning, and so I'm spoiled because a cold house is just always what I've had in the spring and summer, and growing up in Ontario when it's humid. But when we look to trying to stay cool, is air conditioning the wrong answer?
Well, air conditioning has some benefits and some, I don't want to say drawbacks, but there's some concerns in that air conditioning produces waste heat that ends up heating up the outdoor space, and we want to keep our environment as cool as possible. We're already putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which end up heating our planet, so we do want to kind of keep that in check. And air conditioning uses electricity, and sometimes, folks say, well, it puts extra demand on the grid. But the real benefit of air conditioning, though, is that it protects people who are very vulnerable and sensitive to heat. And when we have an extended heat wave, there are many people who rely on it, and it can be a matter of life or death. So in addition to air conditioning and heat pumps, which provide what's called mechanical cooling, there's lots that people can do with an approach called passive cooling. And it requires no power. So it's a really great option. It's very simple to implement. It's relatively inexpensive, and it can give us a few degrees of cooling on its own. And then the great thing is that you can combine it with air conditioning and heat pumps, which means that those systems don't have to work as hard, and you can save a bit of money. And you've got a buffer now in case there's a power outage.
Is passive cooling sleeping with ice packs in my armpits?
Well, it sounds like it, but it's similar. We can do simple things like opening windows and doors. So using natural ventilation, especially at night. So we want to open the windows in a way that moves cooler air through from a lower level, and perhaps a window across the room that may be at a higher elevation, or sometimes we have ceiling vents or openings that we can open higher up. In Europe, they have this in many different countries. So natural ventilation is a great option. Another great option is adding shade to your windows. So there are blinds, there's heat-resistant curtains that you can get, and there's window films, Sarah, which are these dark-colored or kind of a smoky color film that you can apply to a window. You don't need to keep them on all year, but you can apply this film. It sticks on the window, and it cuts down the solar radiation coming through the window. And then on the outside of the window, if you have more time, you can install shutters and awnings to the outside of the window, and they shade the window. And the great thing about exterior shading on homes is it provides 5 times as much solar protection than an interior roller blind. So another great technique.
Caroline, the interesting thing is I've seen that window film on car windows before, but I've never seen it in a home.
Yeah, it's available for windows, for home windows, and again, relatively inexpensive, and it can be installed and taken down when it's not needed. So it's a very cost-effective option.
Okay, and keep going, more tips.
Yeah. So if you're in the position to upgrade the insulation on your home, now this would be a longer-term measure, having better insulation and weather stripping on your windows and doors, that will keep any cool air in and any warm air out. So you definitely want better insulation if you can. And then another important technique is trees. Trees, vegetation, plants. On properties around your home, and again, if you're not in a zone that's at high risk of wildfire, and if you're renting, on the balcony, you can put plants, flowers, any kind of vegetation. And interestingly, trees and vegetation, they help provide shade, and they also do something called evapotranspiration, which is they cool the air just by living and breathing as a plant or a tree. So really great benefits from vegetation and natural infrastructure. Improve air quality, too.
And that's an important point as we talk about people and builders building higher density housing where people necessarily aren't going to have yards, but they're going to have balconies. And so trying to keep in mind that it's not all single family homes now. As we start to say duplexes and row houses and townhouses, a balcony, even if it's a smaller space, can be a useful space.
It can, and I would suggest taking advantage of that. And another benefit of greenery and vegetation is it makes people feel good. So there's a direct mental health benefit for everyone.
I've never lived without air conditioning, but the interesting thing in Calgary is my family's going to move soon. Air conditioning does not feel nearly as used in Calgary as it did in Ontario. And I think that's just the humidity factor in Ontario. So a lot of people here go and do their own thing, and they do their tricks and the tips and everything to get through end of June, July, and August. And then they kind of go back to life in September. But as we get warmer, there definitely are those people every summer, Caroline, who are like, you know what, this was my breaking summer. And then they go get air conditioning. So if they can implement some of these tips and smaller measures, especially if money's tight right now, then it's a win-win for everyone.
I agree. And passive cooling is really underrated and sometimes just not well known or understood. When you think back 50 or 100 years ago when air conditioning wasn't available, think of what our grandparents or great-grandparents did to stay cool in their homes. Again, homes may have been designed a little bit differently back then, but we can definitely carry forward some of those best practices and wisdom, that other generations had for staying cool in hot environments.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. That's passive cooling expert, Caroline Metz, who is the Managing Director of Climate Resilience and Health, the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo. Thank you for your time this afternoon, Caroline. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.